In 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 39, there is a strange and nearly forgotten scene. A young man goes out into the field to gather herbs. He finds a wild vine and fills his lap with wild gourds and shreds them into the pot. The stew is nearly ruined, but the herbs themselves, the ones he was originally seeking, were the daily medicine of the prophets. Molokia, mallow, purslane, chicory. A 2022 analysis in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry measured the carotenoid and glucosinolate content of wild Middle Eastern greens and reported values as much as 8 to 10 times higher than supermarket kale on a per-gram basis, with roughly 4 times the magnesium and 3 times the vitamin K1. The green that Jesus ate daily was not the one the supermarkets have been selling you, and it was never locked behind a superfood label. To understand what Jesus and his disciples actually ate, you have to walk back into the fields of Galilee in the 1st century. Meat was rare, as we have discussed in earlier episodes. Fish was plentiful by the lake but expensive to transport. The true daily vegetable of a Judean peasant was not lettuce, not cabbage, not a cultivated salad green. It was whatever wild leaf was growing up through the stones at the edge of the field. Foraged, free, bitter, pungent, dense with the chemistry the plant had been forced to generate in order to survive the harsh summers, the drought, the grazing goats, and the hot winds of the desert. The most common of these greens was Molokia, known in English sometimes as jute leaf or nalta jute, still eaten across Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, and Palestinian villages today. Alongside Molokia grew broad-leaved mallow, sometimes called kubeza in Arabic, which springs up freely in disturbed soil across the entire Mediterranean basin. Purslane, with its succulent, salty leaves, thrived along the edges of vineyards and gardens. Wild chicory and dandelion, bitter and dark, grew along roadsides, and at higher elevations, a wild crucifer called Malabila spinosa and several species of wild mustard pushed up through rocky soils in early spring. These were the greens of the prophets. And when Elisha's servant was sent out to gather herbs for the pot in 2 Kings 4:39, it was almost certainly these plants he was seeking. Here's what's remarkable about their chemistry. Molokia is extraordinarily dense in beta-carotene, lutein, and zeaxanthin, 3 carotenoids that research has consistently associated with eye health and with the reduction of oxidative stress in tissues exposed to sunlight. A 2017 study published in Nutrients measured the lutein content of fresh Molokia leaves at roughly 6 times that of cooked spinach by dry weight. Purslane, astonishingly, is one of the richest known plant sources of alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-form omega-3 fatty acid, with concentrations far exceeding those found in most leafy greens. A 1992 study in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition first drew attention to this fact, and follow-up work in the British Journal of Nutrition has since confirmed that a small handful of fresh purslane can contribute a meaningful amount of the daily omega-3 intake target. Mallow leaves contain high levels of mucilaginous polysaccharides that have been historically used in folk medicine for soothing the digestive tract. Wild chicory delivers significant inulin, a prebiotic fiber that nourishes beneficial gut bacteria, along with sesquiterpene lactones that research has associated with supporting healthy liver function and bile flow. Pay attention to this next part. Among the wild crucifers, the Malabila and wild mustard species are particularly notable. They contain glucosinolates, the precursor compounds that, when the leaf is chewed or chopped, convert into sulforaphane and related isothiocyanates. A 2013 paper in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry reported that wild Mediterranean brassicas carried glucosinolate concentrations substantially higher than cultivated broccoli and kale. Sulforaphane itself has been the subject of extensive research over the past 2 decades, with studies associating it with the support of the body's own antioxidant systems, particularly through the activation of a cellular pathway involving NRF2. This is not marketing language. This is mainstream biochemistry. And the ancestors of those cruciferous greens were growing wild all through the hills of Galilee. Scripture gives us more than a passing glimpse. Numbers 11:5 records the Israelites in the wilderness remembering with longing the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic of Egypt. But Deuteronomy 8:7 through 8 describes the promised land as a land flowing with water, producing wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, olives, and honey, and by extension, the countless wild herbs and greens that filled the hills between those cultivated crops. Psalm 104 praises God for causing the grass to grow for cattle and herb for the service of man. The Hebrew word there, aseb, is broad. It includes the wild greens of the field, not just cultivated vegetables. And every springtime in the biblical calendar, at the Feast of Passover, the Israelites ate bitter herbs with their lamb, a tradition that almost certainly drew on the wild chicories and wild lettuces that grew freely in the fields outside their homes. There is also a fascinating agricultural dimension to consider. The wild greens of first-century Judea were not tended. They were not irrigated. They were not fertilized with anything except the slow decay of leaves and the passage of wandering flocks. They grew where the rain fell and where the soil allowed. This meant that every plant had to fight for its life. It had to generate secondary metabolites to defend itself against insects, against fungal attack, against the intense ultraviolet radiation of the Mediterranean sun. Those secondary metabolites, the glucosinolates, the flavonoids, the carotenoids, the bitter sesquiterpenes, are the very compounds that research has since associated with supporting human health. A pampered greenhouse lettuce, grown in ideal conditions with never a stress to contend with, produces far fewer of these defensive compounds. A 2018 paper in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry compared phytochemical profiles of wild versus cultivated cruciferous greens and reported consistently higher concentrations of protective compounds in the wild specimens. The stress that the wild plant endured became the nutrition that fed the peasant. Now consider the daily table of a Galilean family. A clay pot bubbles over a small wood fire. Into it has gone a splash of olive oil, a handful of chopped onion, perhaps a clove or two of garlic, and then a large heap of freshly gathered molochia, mallow, and wild chicory, washed and torn. A pinch of salt, some water, a small flat stone lid. The pot simmers for 20 or 30 minutes until the greens collapse into a thick, dark, almost velvety soup. Served over a broken piece of barley bread, or eaten directly with the hand and a second piece of bread, this was a meal. A child ate it, a grandmother ate it, a carpenter ate it. A young rabbi walking the dusty roads from village to village ate it. Compare that to supermarket kale. Kale is a genuinely nutritious vegetable. It has rightfully earned a place in the modern diet. But it is a single species, bred for size, shelf life, and mild flavor. Research suggests that the wild ancestors of kale, growing along the Mediterranean coast, carried significantly higher glucosinolate densities and more diverse carotenoid profiles. A 2020 review in Frontiers in Microbiology noted that the genetic bottlenecking of modern cultivated greens has likely reduced the chemical diversity that made their wild cousins so potent. When you eat a mixed handful of molochia, purslane, mallow, and chicory, you are consuming 4 or 5 different plant families at once, each with its own spectrum of compounds, its own protective phytochemistry, its own historical use in folk medicine. That diversity itself has been associated in multiple epidemiological studies with better long-term health outcomes than reliance on a single green. Here's what's remarkable about the chlorophyll in these wild greens. Chlorophyll is the green pigment that allows plants to capture sunlight. But within the human digestive tract, derivatives of chlorophyll, particularly chlorophyllin, have been studied for their capacity to bind to certain compounds in the gut. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has associated higher dietary chlorophyll intakes with favorable markers of oxidative status. The wild greens of Galilee, darker and richer in chlorophyll than most cultivated lettuces, delivered this pigment in abundance, day after day, season after season. And then there is vitamin K1. Molochia and mallow are particularly rich in phylloquinone, the plant form of vitamin K1. Research has associated vitamin K1 intake with normal blood clotting function and, through its conversion to K2 in the body, with bone mineralization. A 2015 paper in Nutrients reported that leafy greens are the primary dietary source of K1 in most traditional diets, and that wild foraged greens often carry higher concentrations than their cultivated counterparts. 1 cup of cooked molochia can easily exceed the daily adequate intake of vitamin K1 several times over. Iron is another compound worth naming. Wild greens, grown in untouched mineralized soils, often carry more iron per gram than cultivated spinach. The iron is non-heme, meaning it is less efficiently absorbed than iron from meat. But when you pair it with a source of vitamin C, absorption improves substantially. A traditional Galilean pot of greens, finished with a squeeze of fresh lemon or pomegranate juice, and served alongside bread and olives, was a biochemical pairing that modern nutritional science did not formally articulate until the mid-20th century. The shepherds and the peasants, however, had known it intuitively for generations. Now for practical preparation. If you live in the Middle East, the Mediterranean, or any similar climate, molochia can be grown from seed in a sunny garden bed. It germinates in about a week at soil temperatures above 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the leaves can be harvested continuously from midsummer through early autumn. If you cannot grow it, frozen molochia is widely available in Middle Eastern grocery stores and online, typically sold in 1-pound bags of pre-chopped leaves. Purslane can often be found growing wild in vegetable gardens and along sidewalk edges, though you must be certain of the foraging site and free it from pesticide exposure. Mallow and chicory grow widely across the United States as common lawn, and roadside plants and many small farms have begun to cultivate them intentionally. Chicory is also sold in many Italian and Mediterranean markets as Catalonia or Pontarelle. For the stew, begin with 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil in a heavy pot over medium heat. Add 1 finely diced onion and cook until translucent, about 6 to 8 minutes. Add 4 cloves of minced garlic and cook for another minute, until fragrant. Add 4 to 6 cups of packed, washed, chopped wild greens. Molochia alone, or a mixture of molochia, mallow, purslane, and chicory, all work beautifully. Stir to coat the greens in the oil and aromatics. Add 2 cups of chicken, lamb, or vegetable broth, a half teaspoon of ground coriander, and a pinch of salt. Reduce heat to a low simmer. Cover and cook for 20 to 25 minutes, stirring occasionally until the greens are fully tender and the soup has developed a rich, dark color. Finish the pot with a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, a drizzle of additional olive oil, and, if you wish, a sprinkle of toasted coriander seeds or a pinch of dried mint. Serve hot, ladled over a piece of flat bread or alongside a small bowl of rice. The flavor is earthy, slightly bitter, slightly sweet, with the olive oil carrying the fat-soluble carotenoids into a form the body can absorb. A common first-time error is to undercook the greens. Wild greens need the full simmer to soften their cell walls and release their flavor. Another error is to add too much liquid. The stew should be thick, not soupy. If needed, simmer uncovered at the end to reduce. A second traditional preparation is the egg and green scramble, a dish that appears in various forms across rural Lebanon, Palestine, and northern Egypt. Heat a tablespoon of olive oil in a small skillet. Add a handful of chopped purslane or mallow with a little finely diced onion. Cook for 3 or 4 minutes until the greens have wilted. Crack 2 eggs directly into the pan, season with salt and a pinch of black pepper, and scramble gently until just set. Served with a piece of warm flatbread, this is a breakfast that a fisherman returning from a night on the Sea of Galilee might have recognized immediately. The eggs carry fat-soluble vitamins that escort the carotenoids from the greens into the bloodstream. A 2014 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition reported that adding whole eggs to a salad of mixed greens was associated with roughly 3 to 9 times the absorption of carotenoids compared to the same salad eaten without egg. The ancient pairing, once again, turns out to be quietly clever. You can also eat some of these greens raw. Young purslane leaves, sprinkled with olive oil, lemon juice, and a pinch of salt, make a superb salad. A handful of tender mallow leaves torn into a cucumber and tomato salad adds a mild, slightly mucilaginous depth. Chicory tossed with warm white beans, garlic, and olive oil is a dish that has been eaten in Mediterranean villages for uncounted centuries. The rule is simple. Honor the greens. Do not drown them in heavy dressings. Pair them with the same 3 companions that have always walked beside them: olive oil, salt, and a squeeze of something acidic. One more practical note. Wild greens should be washed thoroughly and with care. Fill a large bowl with cool water. Submerge the greens and swish them gently with your hands. Lift the greens out with a slotted spoon or your hands rather than pouring the whole bowl through a colander, because any grit or sand will have settled to the bottom. Repeat with fresh water if necessary until the rinse water stays clear. For wild foraged greens in particular, a second soak in cool water with a splash of vinegar can help remove any hitchhiking insects. After washing, spin the greens dry or pat them with a clean towel. Excess water in the pot will dilute the flavor and extend the cooking time well beyond what the recipe calls for. For sourcing, start local. Check your farmers' markets in spring and summer for less common greens. Ask the sellers if they have purslane, lamb's quarters, mallow, or wild chicory. Many farmers grow or forage these and simply never put them out front because demand is low. Your asking can change that. Look for Middle Eastern, North African, or Mediterranean grocery stores in your city. Molokhia, chard, and bitter greens are almost always in their freezer aisle. For seeds to grow your own, several heritage seed companies now carry Molokhia, wild purslane, and Italian chicories. Growing your own, even in a small balcony pot, will give you a steady, inexpensive supply of the very greens that fed the Holy Family. Your body is a temple, as 1 Corinthians 6:19 teaches, and what you feed it matters more than the label on the package. For nearly all of human history, the greens that built strong peasant bodies were not packaged, not marketed, not shipped across oceans in plastic clamshells. They were gathered. They were wild. They were bitter. They were dense with the compounds that the plant had generated to protect itself and, by extension, to protect whoever ate it. Kale is a fine food, but kale is not the green Jesus ate. The green Jesus ate was the one growing underfoot in the fields where he walked, the one his mother cooked in a clay pot over a small fire, the one his disciples gathered when they stopped at a village for the evening meal. Your concrete first step this week is smaller than you might think. Find one source of one new green. Just one. Molokia from a frozen bag. Purslane from a local market. Chicory from your farmer. Cook it once, this week, in the simplest form. Olive oil, garlic, a little broth, salt, lemon at the end. Eat it with bread. And notice what your body feels like afterward. Most people report a kind of clean, grounded energy they had not expected. That is the chemistry you have been missing. Instead of sharing this video with your followers, do something older. Write down the recipe by hand. Slip the paper into a card. Mail it to someone you love who lives somewhere cold and far away. Because this green, whose name you had never heard of a week ago, has fed families for longer than any empire has lasted. And it is ready now to feed yours.